I'm so excited to be here and to present part two. Thank you so much for attending. If you did not get to part one, that's totally fine. You're not going to be lost. I'm not going to do like a huge full recap or anything, but I'll still touch on some key points from the first session. And as was mentioned, there is a recording available, so you can watch that at your leisure. So time for the full introduction. My name is Karin Eriksson. Emma or Emma Karin are both correct for my first name. I use she, her, and hers pronouns, and my day job is as a senior young adult librarian for the Brooklyn Public Library. I said this in session one, but it always bears repeating. I am not perfect, nor am I an expert in anything that I'm going to talk about today. It's all built off of research, the work of others, countless mistakes I've made, and the willingness to admit that I don't know everything. And with that, I'm also always open and working on myself, listening and open to learning. And I really hope that you'll reach out to me after this presentation if you have any questions or if you want to share experiences, give feedback. These sessions are meant to be helpful. And so if there's something you wish that I had explained a little bit more or something you think that I missed, please let me know, because I do want to try to rerun these again, and it would be great to make it, the best they can be. And I created these presentations after attending a lot of these sort of trauma-informed librarianship webinars and feeling energized, but not sure what the next step is going to be. So my hope is that with this today, you're going to leave with some real practical tools and skills that you can take back to your branches and put into your library work. And with that, we'll get started with the agenda, which is pretty simple. We're going to do first some definitions just to make sure we're all on the same page with the language we're using. I'm going to talk about critical reflective practice. Then we're going to go into talking about empathy and finally end on going over some interactions and what praxis. And with that, I will then move on to the definitions where I'll define praxis if that's the first time you're hearing this word. So first definition is trauma. Trauma results from an event, series of events, or circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening. The key part here is that it's going to also have these lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. Trauma-informed is this new approach in, or not so new, but approach in human services fields that recognizes an individual is more likely than not to have had a history of trauma. So it started in the nursing world, it's gone over into teaching, into architecture, into everything. And essentially it is to try to create spaces and interactions that don't cause more harm or re-traumatize someone. Praxis is essentially practice as distinguished from theory. So it's the application or use of our knowledge and our skills. My sort of more simple definition is it's just taking what we say and have it become what we do. So I can say that I'm anti-racist, but it's my actions, my praxis that's going to really prove that I am anti-racist. Accountability is the last one. It is engaging with the consequences of our decisions and our actions. It is our job to hold ourselves accountable. No one can do that for us. We have to do it ourselves. And as the great Mia Mingus shared, accountability is not a destination. It's going to be a skill that we build and practice. Just like everything we're going over today, you're probably not going to get it right on the first try. Very rarely does that ever happen. We're going to have to work on these things, build until it becomes kind of, second nature to us to engage in these theories. Now, to put any of this stuff into practice, we have to start with ourselves. Trauma-informed practices are not about other people. It's about us and how we interact with situations and people, because we can only control ourselves, right? We can only control our actions, our behaviors, and our reactions, but we can't control how other people are going to act or behave or react. So emotional intelligence is a really great way to start with ourselves. It's essentially this ability to recognize, understand, and manage your own emotions and the emotions of people around you. And it's made up of 5 main parts. So the first, self-awareness, recognizing and understanding your own emotions, self-regulation, managing your emotions, self-motivation, setting standards for yourself and working towards goals, social awareness, which is the ability to consider the perspectives of others, essentially empathy, which we'll get into later, And then social skills, the ability to interact with other people. So in this session, we're going to focus on some self-regulation techniques. We're going to touch back on self-awareness, go into social awareness with empathy, and then a little bit on social skills when we're talking about interacting and kind of putting it all together. So lastly, I do want to recap Nisha's framework for trauma-informed action. Nisha held one of the most useful webinars on trauma-informed librarianship that I think I've ever attended, and is just like an absolute delight of a person. I urge you to check out her website and her upcoming workshop on boundaries, which are both linked in the Padlet. I find her framework is really helpful because it's not like a checklist, and it's designed to be continuous, to show us that there's no end game to the work of this. Like, we're going to be constantly doing it, constantly engaging. And their framework touches on reflecting on ourselves, our roles, our responsibilities, and our organizations. Being, that means like sitting with ourselves, reframing or shifting our assumptions. We need to be more accepting of where we are in our journeys and how we can meet ourselves where we're at, instead of like shaming or guilting ourselves because we're not, somewhere else further down the line. And then by doing, which is, that's, you could start small, but it could also be assessing what you have done, just generally putting your things into action, into practice. So now we're going to move on to talking about critical reflective practice, which will aid you in this reflection piece of the framework. There are many definitions of critical reflection, but this one is mine, my personal one. Critical reflective practice is a process of personal inquiry in which the goal is to unearth, examine, discover, and change the assumptions that influence how you engage with the world. So any and all reflection is a link between thinking and doing. The critical reflection adds this other level of inquiry that takes our thinking deeper by unsettling assumptions, particularly about power. And it's going to ask us to examine our biases, take into account our privilege, and like how that shows up. This kind of introspective interrogation can be totally transformative because it allows us to change ourselves and the way that we interact with patrons, people, situations. I will also say that it's going to be sometimes really uncomfortable to undertake a critical reflection because it does highlight maybe assumptions and views and behaviors that we don't really like about ourselves, we're not proud of, but we're not going to be able to grow if we don't challenge and interrogate ourselves. Jan Fuchs wrote one of my all-time favorite pieces on critical reflection. I encourage you to check it out. It's in the Padlet, and it's very short, and it's not super academic-y or jargony read, so it's a really good one. Some reasons we would want to critically reflect is it's going to help us to reduce that gap between what we say and what we do, because we're going to be looking at what it is that we're doing and the things that we're saying we'd like to be doing more closely. It's going to help to improve our practice. So what are our actions? How could we be engaging better? It's going to help us to challenge our assumptions and our biases, which is going to be very important later when we talk about empathy and practicing empathy. And finally, it's going to help us to encourage growth and like a general overall growth mindset. So all reflection is going to be grounded on the sort of active evaluation of like thinking, your thoughts, your decisions, your actions. It's about exploring your beliefs and your experiences. But there's considered two different types of reflection. So one is reflection in action, and the other is reflection on action. Reflection in action is going to take place when you're literally in the middle of a situation. You're listening, you're observing, you're analyzing, recalling past knowledge and experiences to determine what your next move is. And this is happening in the moment. And it's also something you probably do without realizing it. I know when I started, I was like, how do you expect me to do all of these things while like someone is yelling at me that the printer isn't working? And then I was in a situation where someone was yelling at me because the printer wasn't working. And I was able to shift my thinking into reflection mode and help me handle the situation instead of like getting really defensive or raising my voice to match theirs or refusing to help, which is all probably what I wanted to do because no one likes getting yelled at. Instead, I shifted to think, okay, wow, they're getting way more upset over this than I think is really necessary. Maybe something else is going on here. Let me remain calm and steady, and I'll diffuse the situation by just reprinting the paper for free, because I'm using my knowledge that that's like a policy, I can do that. And then I'll de-escalate myself afterwards, like, because I can feel I'm getting riled up. I'm going to need, after the situation is over, to go and calm myself down and bring me back to a calm point. So there, I analyzed the situation, used past knowledge, and then I changed my reaction to the situation that was happening. And then reflection on action is when you look back on situations that have already happened and then analyzing after the fact, which you also definitely already do. I'm positive of it, because if you've ever thought, that probably could have gone differently, that is essentially reflecting on action by thinking back to what happened and how it could have been different. Now, with critical reflective practice and reflection as a practice, it is a little bit more formalized, a little bit more structured. This is the one that I personally use. I think it is the most helpful. And first, you essentially start off by just describing what happened. And you're going to do this without judgment. You're doing it without analysis. You're saying patron came in, had problems printing, etc. And then maybe I write, I was thinking that, the situation was escalating. I was feeling really tense about it. Analysis, you're then going to examine for any maybe biases that were there, any privilege, any instances of power imbalances that were present. So, if you're working with someone who's a teenager and maybe you don't really like teenagers, you could say like, okay, I kind of had a bias there because I just assumed this because of they were younger than I am. You can also include how this informed your thinking, which is essentially that too. And then the last part is to think about different sources of knowledge that have helped you to understand this experience. So maybe it's another experience that you had, or something that you read, or something that you heard, a conversation. Like, where did you learn some of the things that you're now analyzing and describing? Then you're going to move into thinking about a conclusion. So what can be concluded from the experience? How did it go? What happened? What else could you have done differently? And the last bit here, which I think is the most important and the part of it that is also really critical, is the action plan. So what are you going to do in this situation next time that it happens? What steps are you going to take based on what you've learned? Like, if you realize the situation you were really biased, how is a way that you can unlearn those biases? Now, this all sounds very formal and, long and complicated. And I don't want you to think that every reflective moment you have is going to be really intense and profound. It might be, and it's great if it is, but sometimes it can be as simple as I was finding that around 3:00, if I was on the desk, I was very snippy with people and I was being kind of short with them. And I tried to think like, why is this happening? Like, I'm not really angry with them, but I can definitely feel like I don't really want to help anyone. I'm kind of just like a little tense. And after thinking about it, like day to day and then like over a week, I realized, oh, I'm just really hangry at 3:00. Like, that's it. Like, oh, breakfast and lunch have kind of worn off. I'm just like really hungry. And so I'm just get kind of like snippy with people. So then my action plan is, all right, I'm going to take my break at 2 or 2:30 if I can before I go on the desk. That's a full, complete cycle of critical reflection of why I saw something that was happening. I figured out the situation and then I made a plan to change it. Now, with reflection on action, when you reflect is really all the time if you can, but you can do it, you can reflect just like on a whole day, how a whole day went, how a whole week went, how a whole month, a year. You can reflect after something happens or when, something is happening, and you don't have to be involved. You could see something happen with a coworker or maybe across the street and you want to reflect on how it went. I think it can be really important to reflect on your workplace, your institution or branch as a whole, especially if you're in a position of leadership, to just like take into account the environment of the branch itself. And you can reflect when you learn something new. So you could leave this webinar and go do like a full reflection cycle on it. What did I say? What did you learn? Anything like that. And the action of reflecting can look a lot of different ways. The easiest is just to write it down, right? Get a notebook, open a Google Doc, whatever you have. I most often do the second one, which is I just talk to myself. I do a lot of like internal conversations of like, okay, Emma, why did that happen the way that it did? But I do encourage you that you do go back. If you do just verbalize it, to try to write it down later so that you have something to go back to. You can talk with your friends and your coworkers and your colleagues just really informally. Having a sounding board, having someone else to be like, oh yeah, I saw this and this is how I interpret it, can be very helpful. Or you can do it more formally and create like, okay, every week we have our critical reflection discussion group, and this is what we talk about, and this is, how it goes. I have been thinking about starting a critical reflection discussion group at Metro. So if anyone else is maybe interested in that, you can reach out. I think it could be a really good part of my practice personally. So next we're going to move into, what does reflection in action look like? And it can look a lot of different ways. There's lots of different options for this. These are just some ideas of like, it can look like you're internally thinking just generally, what is currently happening? Like, what is the situation that I'm in? What's going on here? Is it going as I expected it to? You can also be checking in with your body and how you feel about a situation, which I think is very important and a good part of, regulating emotions. Is like, okay, maybe you can feel that you feel really flushed, but you have to decide, am I flushed because I'm anxious and I'm nervous about what's happening? Or am I flushed because maybe I'm angry or upset about what's happening? And then evaluating the situation. This is really important, right? Like, how is this going? Is this escalating? Is this suddenly gone from like a simple printer problem to, screaming and yelling and everyone's volume is at like a 400? It's also important to think about and determine, is this a dangerous situation or am I maybe just uncomfortable? Because there's a really big gap in between those things. You can also think and evaluate, like, what do I know that I can use in this situation to act, right? Like, by knowing your library policies, outside information that you have, past experiences, like, what do I have that I can bring up and use in a situation to change the outcome? And I've put together a little example. So a patron comes up to the front desk and tells Marion, the librarian, bonus points if you get the reference, they are having issues printing a document. Lots of printer problems in my branch. The patron speaks very quietly, using short sentences, and Marion notices that the patron is maybe like they're picking at their fingernails or kind of fidgeting, and they're not making a lot of eye contact. Marion can feel that she's getting really frustrated because she can't understand what the patron is saying, and there's just like a lot going on around her. So she takes a deep breath in through her nose and then out through her mouth to settle herself. And while she does not know for sure, she decides to approach the situation as if the person is uncomfortable, or maybe they're really shy, they're anxious, maybe they're even neurodivergent. She doesn't know. She is going to assume that, or think that maybe this is the first time that they're using the computers. Maybe they're confused. Maybe they're embarrassed that they don't know how to use them. She's not making these assumptions in terms of like setting up a bias for how she's going to interact. It's more about making these assumptions so that she can open herself up to react and respond better by adjusting her body language to be more open. So maybe if she had her arms crossed, she uncrosses them. Maybe she gets out from behind the desk. She asks the patron, can you please show me the problem that you're having? I'll try to see how I can help. And then when she does any step, she doesn't just like pick up the mouse and go click, 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 click. She's explaining every step before she does it. And then when it's over, she asks the patron, are you sure? Do you have any other questions or anything else I can help you with? Don't forget, library staff is always here to help you if you have a problem. So there was, right, the initial action. Marion reflected inwardly, settled herself, and then changed the way that she reacted with the patron afterwards. So this is also not only an example of reflection in action, but also a sort of example of what does a trauma-informed interaction between a librarian and a patron look like, by sort of changing our behaviors and the way that we approach a situation. So reflection in action can be very hard, especially when a situation is really triggering, or it's like rapidly escalating, or there's about 500 things going on at the same time. which is always the case in a public library or any library setting, really. So grounding techniques can be helpful to try to bring us back to a point of stasis, to calm, sort of back to zero when we're feeling really overwhelmed emotionally. And most of the ones I'm going to share with you can be done in the moment, but some of them you might only be able to do sort of after the situation, depending on your environment. But those are still important to help bring you back down, to help you de-escalate yourself, essentially. So some grounding techniques in like a physical category is like real simple. Do some deep breathing. There is 101 different types of breathing techniques you can do. Find the one that works. You can pick up or touch items next to you. Sometimes for me, I will pick up a pen and just start clicking it to help ease my anxiety, but also just to kind of like bring me back into the moment. A really excellent one, if you can do it, is drinking cold water. Lots of science on that one, that it can help kind of snap you back into reality. If you're able, physically remove yourself from the situation you're in. Maybe ask a coworker, hey, I can't handle this. Can you please come step in and help me? Another, move your body. If you're able to, like, have a dance break, or do some stretching, whatever it might be, just to sort of feel through yourself. And then lastly, feel your body. I have a very good friend who gives herself like a really, really big bear hug to kind of help regulate herself when she's feeling de-escalated. Mentally, you can try repeating like an anchoring phrase, and this could be a mantra or an affirmation or a really silly word that just sort of like helps break you out of the cycle you're in. You can visualize a task you enjoy doing, or maybe your favorite place. You can imagine the feeling dissipating. This one is very helpful for me. It's like, picture your anger as a glowing red ball, and the ball gets dimmer and dimmer and dimmer, and then all of the pieces float away. Soothing, practicing self-kindness. So this could be similarly to, repeating an affirmation like, I am doing my best, I am a good person, reminding yourself that you are doing your best and you are a good person. You could list your favorite things, plan an activity. So this could be, okay, this situation is really intense right now, but afterwards I'm going to go make myself a cup of tea. I'm going to go step outside. I'm going to take in a bit of sunshine, a breath of fresh air, and then make sure that you can go do that activity afterwards. You can help listen to music. That's a great one if you're able to, pop on some headphones or sit outside in a car and just like blast whatever your favorite tune is to help, bring you back to the calm centered zero. Now, there are many self-regulation methods, and there's going to be some effort in finding the ones that are going to work for you, and what's going to be the most helpful in the moment, and reminding to use them is going to take practice. So I've included some more articles and techniques in the Padlet to help you. And I would also recommend, if you're able to, try to practice them when you're not, in panic mode, so that they do become like a second nature to you when you are in panic mode. Now we're going to move on to empathy. As I mentioned, one of the 6 parts of emotional intelligence is self-awareness, which is the ability to consider the perspectives of others, which is essentially the simple definition of empathy. And in my research of empathy, I found there are like 101 different definitions. Everyone seems to have their own, but they all kind of boil down to some form of interpreting, understanding, feeling, and acting on another person's feelings or emotions. I split empathy into 3 parts with 2 applications. So the 3 parts are emotional, which is feeling someone else's feelings, so maybe their anger becoming your anger. Cognitive, where you're understanding from their perspectives, you understand why it is that they're feeling angry. And then motivational, that need to respond to their feelings. So whether it's soothing their anger or helping them feel happy when they're feeling sad. And then the applications are interpersonally, which is like, between you and one other person or in a small group. And then socially is going to be applied to people, like you've never met before. They're going to be, broad groups that maybe you have to learn about their experiences, and it's going to apply sort of outside of your general immediate community. Now, empathy is a skill like everything else. No one is really born empathetic, right? If anything, we're born more with our biases and our privileges and things like that. Empathy is something that we have to work on every day consciously. So, how do we do that? The first and the most importantly is by always checking our biases, always checking our privilege, and always checking, imbalances of power or actions of power that we engage in. This is where critical reflective practice comes in very, very helpful because it forces us to say, why did I just do that thing that I did? Is it because of X, Y, and Z? And of course, you do have to first take that step of admitting that you do have biases and you do have privilege. That is another workshop, but is, something important that everyone should be looking into. Next, working on listening to people without interrupting. I am real bad at this one because I just always think I know the right thing to say at the right moment, or I have the solution to the problem before I even know the end of the question that they're posing. But it's very helpful just to let someone talk the whole way through before jumping in there. Next is to begin to pay attention to body language and other types of nonverbal communication. So, recognizing what does it look like when someone is anxious? What does it look like when someone is happy? What does it look like? And paying attention to those so that you can notice it when you're working with someone else and say, like, okay, how can I use their body language to understand how I should react to the situation that's happening? Which leads also into doing your homework. So, this is like learning about the people and populations that you're serving, which feels like, library worker 101, but it can be harder, easier said than done because there's also a million other things we need to be doing. But if you can, like, engage in new experiences around your library, like if they have street festivals on a day that you're not working and you can, like, go check it out, right? See your community that you serve in a different light. If you work in an area with a lot of different groups from different organized religious backgrounds, like, okay, what are their customs? What are their holidays? How can you make sure that you're being sensitive to that? And what needs that they might have that you may not know about because you're just learning about their world, which leads to being curious and asking questions and then genuinely listening without interrupting. It's also important in this part to be humble, right? Admit, I don't know everything. That's why I'm asking. I hope that you can help me, find the answer I'm looking for, that you can help me to learn more about whatever it is that you're searching for. Reframing issues when they arise and being non-judgmental is very important. So let's say, a group of teenagers come into your library and you're already like, oh my gosh, here they come. It's going to be so loud. They're going to be so disrespectful. And they might be because they're teenagers and they're loud and they don't really, they don't really respect authority that way. But if you start off with that, it's going to be a bad time. You're never going to have a positive interaction with them. And try to reframe those issues, right? That person who is so upset about the printer, they're not upset at you, really. They're upset about the printer. They're upset about losing their money. Maybe they're upset about something that happened way before they ever came into the library. So trying to, like, reframe and just shift your thinking can really help you to be more empathetic in the situation to go much more smoothly. This is definitely a tough one, but try to understand people even when you don't agree with them. The caveat here is I am not talking about people who are being racist or transphobic or just generally awful. I'm talking more about looking for, ways you can see similarities instead of just focusing on differences so that you can just try to treat people with, the same kindness and dignity that you would hope to be treated with. And lastly, be willing to be vulnerable and open up about how you feel and sit with your discomfort. This is really tough, and it's really tough, especially in a workplace environment. I love my job. I love where I work, but they are not my family members, and I may not be able to be as open with them as I'd like to be. But I do try. I make an effort to know about them. I make an effort to, when I do feel comfortable, to share what's actually going on because eventually it will lead to better interactions between my coworkers and I. And it will also hopefully help them to open up to me so that I can make sure I'm having the best interactions with them that I can. So this is not a checklist either. This is meant to be as a guide for, like, here are some places in which you can be, checking in on yourself, working on things, making sure, like, are you being curious when you're talking to people? Are you listening when you're saying things? Like, can you catch yourself when you have that judgmental eye roll moment? And now, flew through all of that, we are going to come to our trauma-informed interaction. So coming back to the idea of praxis, what does trauma-informed librarianship look like in action? To remind us all, right, trauma-informed essentially means we're trying to not re-traumatize people. We're trying to not cause more harm or harm in the first place when we're interacting with people. I've set up these examples. So there's one slide where there's sort of baseline situations, and then the next slide, they're going to be a little bit more escalating. So the first one that I have here, let's see, the scenario, I think this has probably happened to everyone at one point or another, whether we're the one, saying it or we're the one on the receiving end. But scenario is, right, you're a manager and you need to speak privately with your subordinate. And your response is to say, I need to see you in my office. And you just say real quick and you just sort of like keep walking on. And it might not sound like anything, right? That's literally it. You just need to see them in your office. But to someone who has possibly been in a traumatic situation, their brain is firing like, what did I do? What happened? Like, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Like, where are we going? Do I need to be prepared for something? And in order to try to make this a little bit less triggering for people, really simply just changing the way our language, changing our tone, change it to, oh, hey, Emma, I just need to see you for a second to talk about, that you're going to go give this class visit tomorrow. That's it. That can help me say like, okay, I know what we're going to talk about. I'm not lingering with any questions. I'm not feeling like, as my manager, they have the power to, possibly put things on my record or things like that. So I'm not walking in thinking like, oh my gosh, am I about to get fired? I'm walking in saying, oh, I gotta talk about this class visit. So that's just one way to change something really simple, giving more explanation of why it is that you're putting a meeting or you're having a conversation. Giving people that background information can be very, very helpful to not create a more re-traumatizing event. I am sure this has happened to everybody. A patron is sleeping in the library. The re-traumatizing interaction is standing over the table and just like banging on the table, bang, 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 bang. Wake up, you can't sleep here. You got to get up, you got to leave. I don't know anyone who would want to be woken up that way. It sounds awful, just generally, but it could also be really traumatizing for someone if, the loud noises really affect them. They are just sort of like jolted up and they get, who knows what their heart rate is going up to. And there's so many reasons a person could be sleeping in the library, right? Our brains probably automatically go to like, oh, they're homeless. But what about someone, who has been staying up until 4 o'clock at night with their teething toddler? They just as well might nod off in the library for a little while too. So approaching the person who's sleeping, if you can bend, not all of our knees work that well, but bend down to be on their level. Use a calm tone. Obviously, you might have to be a little loud if they are asleep, but trying to say, hey, excuse me, it's library policy. We can't have you sleeping in the library. If you think you're able to stay awake, just, don't try not to fall asleep. If you know the patron, if they're a regular, if you know their situation, maybe you can offer some support, however they might need it. Or if you don't know them, try to get to know them. Say like, I know Mondays, right? I get so sleepy too, but is there anything else going on? Any other way the library could help you with some support? If you've got resources available, offer them. Another very common scenario, a seemingly unsupervised child is being mean to another kid. So they may have a parent or guardian there, but we're not totally sure. We just see a child being mean to another kid. Maybe they're calling them names or they're getting kind of loud or getting kind of fussy with them. So the common interaction might be just to run over and say, hey, cut that out, right? You can't speak to people like that. You need to leave right now. And if you notice, in a lot of the re-traumatizing interactions, it's a lot about your vocal inflection. It's a lot about the level, like how loud you are, and also just how you walk up into a situation. So if you storm over already yelling, like that could trigger someone into, feeling that fight or flight response. So instead, if you are able, walk over, also bend down to be on their level and just say, hey, my friend, what's going on here? Do you have your adult with you? really can't be, it's not kind to talk to people that way. I don't think you'd like it if someone said that to you. Can you come over here for a minute and tell me what's going on? Because I really want to have you in the library. I know you love being here. It's great to have you, but we can't have you being mean to other kids. We don't want to necessarily pass on judgment or discipline if they're just sort of being snippy with each other. If there is a parent or adult available, you can maybe try to check in with them, but treating them as you would like to have maybe been treated as a child, not being yelled at, being spoken to on a friendly level. Again, same thing too with like, if you can get down to their height, is going to make the situation feel less traumatic. So these are kind of some, I would say, low stakes situations. The next ones are slightly more elevated, more escalated. And I'm going to start off by saying in these types of situations, do not approach alone. If you can, bring somebody else with you, a coworker, if you are in good terms with your security guards that you have at a branch. And you don't necessarily need to like approach together like as a gang, but even if it's just to say like, hey, I'm going to go talk to this person. Can you just keep an eye on me in case anything happens? And then ultimately, I don't believe in severe punitive action for most things, but I would always ask a person if they're able to just leave for the day and to come back tomorrow and like give them a fresh start. But you oftentimes do need to physically remove someone from a space so that they don't continue to possibly like cause harm or stress to other people in the branch. Every library is going to have their own policies. I can't speak to that. You will have to, find that out on your own, what your sort of action plans are or expected action plans are. But these are, in my perfect world, if you had a scenario of a person using drugs in the public restroom, the re-traumatizing action would be just to immediately call the cops. Immediately call the police. Maybe you call the security guard and they call the police. That is re-traumatizing for a number of reasons. One, the person may have bad experiences with the police. The police may not know how to handle the situation. The police may just arrest that person instead of, getting them any help that they might need. So the more trauma-informed approach to something like this would be, again, with someone else, if you can, just walk in and say, I'm sure library has this policy, right? There are no drugs or alcohol allowed on library property. I'm going to have to ask you to leave for the day, especially if they have already, taken the drugs or alcohol. They may need some help getting up. That may take a while. They might be pretty slow. So you may have to stay with them for a minute, but don't try to like rush them or jostle them. Give them the space that they need to help exit on their own. And you can, if you feel comfortable, offer any harm reduction resources. I would not give any kind of advice on like, this is a problem for you. You need to get help. That's not going to help in a situation. The person may not be very receptive to it, but if like maybe there is a safe injection site near you, or, making sure that, they're not shooting up alone so that they, in case of an overdose, those kinds of things. If you feel comfortable sharing the resources that are available to you, that are in your community, that's a good time to do it. So the last scenario that I have is fighting between adult patrons. This would also go for teenagers as well. I am saying fighting in terms of verbally fighting, right? If people are physically harming one another, that is a different type of de-escalation that you need to have. And you still need to, I would say, using trauma-informed tactics, but it is going to be a little bit of a different beast. This year, I'm mostly just talking about a verbal altercation between two adults or possibly teenagers. Similarly, the re-traumatizing interaction is going to be calling the police or like a run-up, raised voice, like, you need to get out of here. You need to leave right now. By bringing yourself up to their level, they're just going to go higher. They're not going to be able to come down lower and de-escalate themselves because you're just adding to the escalation there. So a more trauma-informed way to approach the situation is, again, if it's two people, right, and you bring two people with you, you go with one person, they go with the other person, say, hey, let's step away for a second. Can you tell me what happened? If you can, get them to take a deep breath with you. Like, just say, look, I just want to hear your side of the story. The other person is saying the same thing over there. You're trying to physically remove the two people away. You're not passing judgment on what happened. You're not offering any advice like, oh yeah, well, what he said was totally out of line. You're just trying to get the facts and then say, look, we have a no fighting policy in the library. I think it would be a good idea if you can just leave for the day, try to come back tomorrow. If you suspect that it's possibly like domestic abuse, or someone is seriously, like it could escalate if it goes outside of the library, ask one person to leave first, wait a couple minutes, and then tell the other person, like, okay, I think it could be okay for you to leave now. Again, if it's a domestic abuse and you think that there are resources that you have available that you can offer them, do so in a non-judgmental manner. And it's hard to know. Sometimes you won't know the exact specifics of a situation. You can try to tease it out. You don't have to be a therapist in this situation. Essentially, you're just trying to de-escalate, approach the situation in a way that isn't going to harm anyone, that isn't going to cause more traumatization. And then that library part of it is offering them any services or resources that your system provides or that are available in your community. There is in the Padlet a copy of Trauma-Informed Oregon's Identifying Potential Activation and Strategies to Prevent or Reduce Harm, which is kind of like this. It's like 4 columns, and you would put like, what's a common scenario? What is the response? And like, what's a better way of responding? It's excellent. It's a good tool to try to do by yourself or even in a group, so that you can say like, okay, these are common things that happen. How could we be engaging with them differently from a more trauma-informed approach? Now, before we sort of go into full Q&A, I just want to say, again, thank you so much. This was so much information. I know it's a kind of a dreary Tuesday. I'm happy you stuck with me. And I want to encourage all of us to try to close the gap, right, between what we say and what we do. And I'd really like you to drop in the chat, if you feel comfortable, one thing that you can try to commit to doing after you leave the webinar. It would be great if it's something that you learned today, but it's also a lot of information to process. So even maybe it's just something that you've been meaning to do that you want to commit to doing after you leave here. I think last time we had some really good examples of like, I really want to take a walk on my break. And that was what they put, or they wanted to journal more. You could even say like, oh, you know what? I only attended session 2. So I'm going to commit to watching session 1, tomorrow when I have my break or something like that. So if you want to drop in the chat something that you want to commit to doing after you leave the webinar, and while we can only hold ourselves accountable, you can kind of use this as a way to be like, oh, those people at that webinar saw that I said I was going to go do that thing, so maybe I should go do that. And with that, we are all finished. And again, another really big thank you. Another reminder to please reach out to me. I love talking with people. I love collaborating. I want to know what you thought. Check out the Padlet. It is open to anyone to add things to. You can comment on posts. You can add your own posts. I would love to know what knowledge you have that I have yet to see and see you put it up there. And that is all from me. Bye, everyone.